to order at 7:05 p.m. Please stand and join me in a salute to our flag. I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. At this time, I'd entertain a motion to suspend the rules.
Second.
Thank you. The reason for suspending the rules this evening is twofold. One is so that we all can get committee of the whole completed sooner in the agenda than later. We have someone who contacted us about addressing the council, and given the change of events tonight, I wanted to make sure that we were respectful to her time in addressing the council this evening. And secondly, I've invited Doug Healy from ES&M to come talk to us about the environmental conditions at Highland Park. The report from Doug was completed sooner than I thought, and so because he was here, we said let's do this tonight. So we are going to hear from Doug and the mayor. Any questions about the plan? Do we need to roll call vote? So we requires a roll call vote, and we'll begin with Ms. Jackson.
Ms. Jackson?
Yes.
Mr. Waterman?
Yes.
Mr. Conti?
Yes.
Mr. Cobus?
Yes.
Mr. Vice President Parika?
Yes.
Mr. Delissio?
Yes.
Ms. Dolan?
Yes.
Ms. Reynolds?
Yes.
Ms. Holmes?
Yes.
Mr. Blair?
Yes.
President Cooper?
Yes.
11 yeas, 0 nays.
Thank you. We are now operating under suspended rules. At this time, is there anyone here that would like to address the council on any matter of city business? Come on.
Good evening. I'd like to first thank Vice President Ms. Parika and City Council President Mr. Cooper. I have a letter here from the residents of Green and Fairway Drive. We are neighbors to Attleboro High School, and we are fully in support of all of the construction that's occurring as a result of the high school project. Dear City Council members, as residents of Green Drive and Fairway Drive and neighbors of Attleboro High School, we, the undersigned, are writing to voice our concern regarding installation of an oversized electrical pole that was erected by National Grid on Wednesday, September 25th, and Thursday, September 26th, 2019. We understand that National Grid was required to obtain the approval of the City of Attleboro Council members in order to erect this pole. However, we were not notified in advance of the City Council having taken up this item at an open meeting, nor were we notified prior to the installation of this pole. Our concern is one of public safety, ours as we drive, walk, ride in and out of Green Drive, as well as for all who travel Rathbun-Willard at the intersection of Green Drive. The visibility, which is already restricted due to the curvature of Rathbun-Willard Drive, is further impeded by the installation of this pole. Entering and exiting our neighborhood at the intersection of Green and Rathbun-Willard is already dangerous, and it is anticipated that this danger for drivers, passengers, runners, bikers, and foot traffic will increase with the construction of the entrance of the finished Attleboro High School directly across from the intersection of Rathbun-Willard and Green Drive. While we overlook numerous inconveniences, noise, traffic, detours, dirt, and construction vehicles in and around our neighborhood, we do so as we recognize that the future of the new Attleboro High School will provide improvements for the city, residents, and students alike. We are asking that you hear and address our safety concerns, which are the direct result of the recent installation by National Grid at the entrance and exit of our neighborhood, and that we be adequately informed when future such Attleboro High School building project-related items are presented to, considered by, and voted upon by the Attleboro City Council. And this is signed by numerous members, not all of our neighborhood, but many, and I can leave this for you. To summarize, our concerns are that we were not informed in advance of the public meeting and installation, and we would like to be informed of future items coming to vote. That the neighbors who signed this would like to know why was this type of pole, which is not the usual typical traditional wooden pole, but a very large industrial pole, why was this pole installed as opposed to a traditional pole, whereas they immediately after finishing installation of that pole put another wooden pole where they said they couldn't install this pole, which is in front of the new entrance. And is the city of Attleboro, the project management team, the city councilors, open to improvements to this intersection, as in extending the sidewalks, which currently do not come to the intersection of Green Drive and Rathbun Willard, removing the center island on Green Drive to allow for improved turning capabilities and really improved vision for everyone. And I mentioned to Council President Mr. Cooper and Vice President Ms. Parika that I nearly took out the entire cross-country team last week, and I literally creep out of my neighborhood. So I would invite all of you to come, if you've not been to our neighborhood, to sit there in the early morning hours when high school students are being dropped off and picked up, and or in the afternoon when the same occurs. And then I'll socialize these potential solutions that I mentioned within my neighborhood. Thank you.
Name and address.
Yes.
Name and address.
Oh, yes, your name and address.
Patty Arcese, 31 Green Drive.
Any questions at this, Councilor Conti?
I'm sorry, I didn't catch your first name.
Patty.
Patty. So Patty, at the last school building commission meeting, the Skanska engineering firm put on a display created by a drone of the new rotary and the area that you're talking about. They made reference to how important this pole was to the progress of the new high school, and we're hoping for swift approval from the council members. There's so much going on there, I'm not sure that what they were referring to was the pole that you're referring to, pole that you referred to, or some other pole. But the development in that roadway has been swift, and the challenges that they came across as they were beginning the project of finding undocumented electric lines and undocumented water lines, which all needed to be moved, created a potential drawback to the time schedule and, of course, to the budget. So there is no mechanism that the city has to notify the entire development of Green Drive when there's some activity going on in the project. And I'm not saying that one shouldn't be, because you're probably the most affected of all in that development. So I want you to know that I heard you, because I too live, I abut Highland Green, Highland Park, and I too have been affected by increased traffic with this new construction project. And I too would like to see a better developed mechanism in the city for notifying all residents and all over the city when something is going to happen in their neighborhood. This is something that's been discussed for at least 8 years that I'm aware of. And I would encourage you to go on to AACS, look at the last school building commission meeting, see that drone footage, hear them talk about that electrical pole. Unfortunately, it's after the fact, but you'll understand why it is where it is.
With all due respect, Councilman Conti, I agree with you, but I have an email here dated September 30th at 3:48 p.m. and it's from the Attleboro High School project at cityofattleboro.us. So I do receive notifications periodically, and this one for the week of September 30th says that there will be relocation of utility poles along Rathbun Willard Drive, in addition to other things. So this did not come to me previously during the early parts of this project. I was just added to the list, and I've been at these meetings. I've been at the meetings at the high school. The mayor will recognize me. I've been at several of the meetings. I go onto the website. The city can do, and I think they know, a much better job of informing us. When the cannons were fired last Friday night or Thursday night and people called into the police department did not know what was happening. And we thought there was a gas explosion because they were working on the gas lines at the high school. The city can do better. The council can do better. And I think you owe it to the taxpayers of the city to do better.
I agree with you that the city has a responsibility to inform citizens of city activities, and that we could do a better job. I've always felt that way. But I don't have a quick answer to your issues, other than I will say that because I'm in charge of capital development and capital improvement, city development, that I monitor what's going on in the school building commission and the municipal building commission. And I saw the panic that they were having in the relocation of this particular electric pole. And it was a hasty maneuver, without question.
I watched the September 3rd proceedings this evening before I came here, and I heard Mr. Jacoby talk about how it was critically important that this be moved through committee very quickly, and he asked it to be voted on immediately. Putting the timeliness above notifying, and if you will go look at that poll, you will know why we wanted to be notified about it. Putting the timeliness of the project above public safety is not an excuse.
Patty, I'll only add one thing, is that things that are done can be undone and redone differently. You know, that just because the pole is there doesn't mean it forever has to be there, because there's certainly alternatives to that. So don't lose hope that something else can take place.
Thank you.
And thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. Anybody else that, Patty, any other question? Council Jack? No? Okay. Vice President Frica?
Thank you for coming in. I'm glad that you brought up that you do get interim updates. Are those on a monthly basis, bi-weekly? How are they?
I don't know, because they haven't been consistent, and not everyone in the neighborhood receives them. I think I received them because I reached out to Mayor Hero and others saying, I'm not being notified, please put me on this. And to be quite honest, Bill Rooney was the first person to loop me into all of what was going on, and I think he's the one who actually put me in touch with the individual that makes this distribution list. And if I didn't know Bill, I coached his daughters in softball. If I didn't have a personal relationship with him, I would not be receiving these.
So would it be reasonable to make the maybe reply as I don't know where it generates from either? I think it would be appropriate to wherever it comes from. I'll find out where that is. I think the municipal constables should also be on that mailer list so that we're aware of what's taking place on a regular basis. I find it interesting you bring up Bill Rooney, because you get your blue mail every week. We all know I get more information out of the construction project goings on out of that than I do any other way. So I appreciate you bringing that up. And I would be interested to see, I mean, it still took 2 weeks for those polls to come out, because you were it was in Councilor Jackson's committee, and I'll let her, if you choose to speak about that. It did still take 2 weeks to make it through the committee, so it wouldn't have been impossible to be able to notify you of those kinds of things.
Thank you.
Thank you, Patty.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Patty.
Is there anyone, any other questions?
I had one question.
Council?
So, it is listed when there's a public hearing for the polls.
Mm-hmm.
It is, there was a public hearing for this poll?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
For this particular one?
Yes, I'm assuming, I can't see the number on this.
Yeah.
So I'm assuming since it's a steel pole.
Yes,
That
this
more
is
than
the
likely
steel
it's a
pole.
brand new one.
Yeah.
And the wooden ones are the ones that
That were
we just
moved.
move to a different position.
Right.
Yeah, that's what I'm assuming. So-
Yep.
So the public hearings are listed before the meetings in the newspaper, on the city website. I mean, it is out there.
Any other questions? Seeing none, I am going to refer the matter. I know that Patty was going to had some additional ideas that we spoke of prior to the meeting and that she mentioned before the council, and she can bring those back. And since Rick is attending the school building commission meetings, I'm going to refer that matter to Capital Improvements and City Development Committee, so that he can make sure that they're aware of the concern as well, and follow through with any recommendations bringing before the council and or the administration in terms of additional safety measures to take in that area. Councilor Blair?
A Y is already attached to this pole?
Yes. Some.
That must be the fastest National Grid has ever worked.
Is there anybody else here that would like to address the council at this time? Sure. On any issue.
Thank you, Mr. President, and I'll be speaking about the other issue with Highland Park in a moment, but I wanted to comment on some of Patty's concerns. The poll in question is not related to the high school project. I have an email, and I forwarded this to all of you. This is from Jack Jacoby, the Vice Chair of the School Building Committee. He spoke with Ann Jeanette, who's part of the Skanska, and Castle Booze, and this, quote, "this poll is not part of our project." The polls that we're talking about that were being moved around are over by Drummond Street, not on the corner of Green and Burnt Drive. Excuse me, Green and, what did I say, Burnt? Green and Rathman Willow Drive. So, like I said, this is dated September 26th at 2:24 p.m. I just forwarded it to everybody on the council. So hopefully that, you know, it separates the two projects. I mean, this is a separate issue. As far as the communication goes, Consigli, the construction manager, they actually, whenever there's a big event going on, they go around the entire neighborhood and put a letter in everybody's mailbox about what's going on. That's the first way of communication. Another way is through the city's public website. This particular poll on the corner.
Point of
So,
order,
yeah.
if he's bringing a different topic in front of us, this isn't a public hearing, we're not hearing for, against, or anything else.
Right, so,
This is exactly what she was talking about. I'm
so,
addressing her.
but it's not up to you, Mayor, to debate
Sure.
at this time. So, first of all, anybody can address the council on city business at committee of the whole. And it's up to us to listen to that and understand whether or not we're gonna assign this to the committee. However, I don't think now is the time to talk about what the communication means about this. That's what Councilor Conti's gonna take care of, likely with you and the School Building Commission, on how to make sure and ensure that the community, the directly affected and the community at large, understands the impacts to them with regard to this project, which is what I think Patty and the residents of Green Drive are looking for. That and any additional safety things that the folks at Green Drive, and I'm happy to have a meeting over there and talk through that. But I think it's been assigned to Rick's committee, and he will do his thing with that and bring back recommendations to this honorable body and likely to you.
Good. I look forward to chatting with Rick about that and going into the details of it, so you guys have some more background on that.
Great, thank you.
Very good. Thanks.
Thank you.
Excuse me.
Yes, Councilor
Thank
Jackson?
you. Mr. Mayor, I just want to correct you on something, because I'm still confused on all the polls that we've just moved, relocated, the new ones, everything. But I do distinctively remember Green Drive for the new high school, and I just pulled up our hearings, and we had a public hearing relative to the petition from now, and I'm not sure if this is the exact same poll, but I'm guessing that it is, because I can't see the number, relative to the petition from National Grid requesting permission to install a pole and anchor, pole 0-5, on Green Drive, 90 south of existing pole 1 for the new Attleboro High School. So Mr. Jacoby, I think, is incorrect.
We'll have to look at that more because it also is going
Right
back
here,
to.
it's a public hearing.
Yeah,
So
it's-
just so you know,
Yeah.
yes.
Again, we'll let Councilor Conti work this through the committee process and get some recommendations before this honorable body and ultimately to you, Mayor.
Thank you.
Very good, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
No, thank you, Councilor Conti. And I'm,
Here you go.
Rick, happy to be helpful in any way.
Excellent.
Have a meeting over in the neighborhood to talk about options and any of that kind of stuff that you think is necessary. I'm happy to be helpful and facilitate that. Okay, so at this time, is there anyone else that would like to address the committee, the council committee of the whole? Okay, I'd entertain a motion to arise.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you. So, because we suspended the rules, I can do what I want, right?
Well, that
So-
depends.
So, at this time, the mayor and Doug Healy completed an additional assessment of some of the findings of Highland Park, you're all aware of. Through different means, it was communicated to this honorable body. And we asked lots of questions and had lots of things that we needed, we wanted answers to. Doug completed an additional assessment of Highland Park and is here tonight to address that with us. So I've asked Doug to come present his findings tonight, and then the mayor will follow up to Doug with any questions that we may have of the mayor. But this is, we did get this tonight. Doug wanted to do this tonight, and so that's why we just received the report now, and we will assign this matter to a committee and have the opportunity to ask any additional questions if we need to or anything else. So at this time, I would ask Doug Healy from ES&M to approach the podium, identify yourself, and then walk. I know you have to, unfortunately, you have to do the presentation manually, but we all have copies of it, so individuals at home will be able to see this through the system Doug's trying to get going.
Mr. President, would you mind if I press the
Oh,
button?
sure, perfect, then you don't have to go back and forth. Great idea, thank you.
Well, good evening, City Councilors, and I'm pleased to be here tonight to give you an update on Highland Park, tell you everything I know about it. You know, my apologies for the timing of everything. The fact is I was waiting to get some additional information, which actually just came to me this morning, and it's relative to the construction company building the parking lot. They did some additional testing just about 2 weeks ago, and I just got the report this morning. So I do plan on putting together a report which I can circulate through the mayor to you, but it's basically going to summarize everything I'm going to tell you here tonight. So if it's okay, I'd like to show you about a 15-minute presentation and go through the data and go through some of my findings, and then we'll go from there. So this is an outline of the presentation. I'm going to talk about all the soil sampling results that we have, and it includes the parking area and across the former golf course as a whole. We'll talk about the history of pesticide use and the irrigation from Mechanics Pond, because I know that's been a concern for people as well. We're going to talk, quite frankly, about this FS Engineers report, and I know that most of you have seen it. Unfortunately, there are some untrue statements in that report and some improper wording of this term imminent hazard, and I understand how that's created a lot of concern and a lot of questions, but I'm gonna address that head on tonight and tell you, what exactly in that report is not factual. And then I've done some qualitative and quantitative risk assessment work to show you some actual numbers of what the risk looks like for park visitors and for construction workers. I will tell you really right up front that Highland Park is safe for all these activities that are ongoing now. Walking, running, cross-country meets, hosting the moving wall, and even construction work. So, I've done my homework here. I am very, very thorough. I think most of you know me already. I've worked in the city for about 14 years now. I've worked with the ARA on many complex projects. I do my homework. And in this case, I've also consulted with Gerard Martin, who's the head of waste site cleanup for Mass DEP in this region. And Gerard is...
Could you give us his title again? I'm sorry.
Gerard Martin.
And his title?
He is the section chief for waste site cleanup. And that's Mass DEP in the Southeast Regional Office in Lakeville. So Gerard has actually been, he's been part of the ITC redevelopment project for many years, and he and I have been on that BSD group from the very beginning. So, he's very, very familiar with what goes on in Attleboro. He's been connected with all of the environmental issues that we've been working on throughout the town, and he's pretty familiar with this as well. And I can tell you that Gerard and I are on 100% on the same page on this matter. So it's not just me talking. I have actually consulted with others on this. Okay. By the way. All right, so this is a Google image of the former golf course. Down in the lower central part of the figure, those 6 sample results or sample locations there, the little white boxes. Those are the original 6 samples that were collected by FS Engineers for this parking lot project. So since then, I have taken samples across the whole property. There's a total of 10 additional samples there. And, obviously with the parking lot samples, we just had a small area, so I wanted to spread out and get an overall sense of the condition of this property. And these are the sample results, so you should have these tables in your handouts. So the first 10 samples, H1 through 10, are the ones that ESM collected. Those are also, within that upper 8 inches of soil. And then the bottom 6 or 8 samples, those are from the original parking lot area. You can see along the bottom, it says exposure point concentration. So for each of those columns, that is the average of the sampling results. And averaging is very appropriate here. It's really what we do with all of these types of sites. And the reason we average is because the likelihood of coming into contact with one area versus another area versus another area, it's all really the same. There is no specific activities going on in one area which would weight the data in one way or another. So we do average these data, and you can see starting with arsenic there, the exposure point concentration of the average across this whole area is just below 20, and 20 is the residential soil standard that's actually within the regulations. But residential soil standards are the most stringent and the most conservative standards we have available to us. They assume, residential exposure, which is obviously, full-time rather than what we would assume for a park visitor. So it's a very conservative soil standard. Going over to the right there, you see lead. Lead is also well below the residential soil standard. For chromium actually comes in 2 forms. There's chromium-3, which is generally insoluble, and it has a residential standard of 1,000, so we're well below that. And then hexavalent chromium is the other form of chromium we see typically, and that is the more mobile and more soluble form of chromium, and that has a much lower standard, but we're still way below that. In fact, we generally do not find hexavalent chromium in any of these samples. So the assessment work that I was waiting on, which kind of delayed my presentation here, was some work that was just done by Wallace Construction, and they're the ones building the parking lot. So they have, their world is in OSHA, whereas a lot of the things that I'm talking about are the state regulations called the Massachusetts Contingency Plan. So under OSHA, they're concerned with worker safety and workplace safety. So they wanted to do their own assessment. So they did 2 things. They did what's called an actual exposure assessment. So we had 2 construction workers out just a couple weeks ago, and they were wearing little pumps on their belts, and that was pulling air through a tube right mounted near their faces. And so basically it would pull in the air over a full 8-hour day, and the air would be filtered through a little cartridge, and then the cartridge would go to the lab. So we would see, is there any of these contaminants in the air, generally in the form of dust. Arsenic and lead are not volatile, but we can find that in the dust. So we wanted to look at that, and also they wanted to take some additional soil samples at a little deeper depths of 2 feet and 4 feet, because they were going to be putting in some drainage structures that would go down deeper. So they wanted to make sure that the soil down at those deeper levels was okay. So this is really hot off the press from this morning. I just got this report. There is a slight error just in the units onto the right, which I'm just clarifying. But basically what you see here is the sample ID. So those are the 2 workers that were wearing these pumps. What they were doing was they were digging test pits. So with a backhoe, they were moving the soil around, digging it out, and then putting it back in. So there's some typical soil disturbance activity. And then these little cartridges that got analyzed for arsenic, chromium, and lead, and none of those metals were found at all in the samples. And you can see the results there compared to the OSHA PEL. So that's, again, OSHA's world is all about worker safety and what's allowable for you to be exposed to on an 8-hour day. So the PEL is a permissible exposure limit, and those are set by OSHA, but there's also other agencies like NIOSH that also have similar standards. But basically you can see the sample results compared to those PELs, and they're they weren't detected. So I think that's just another piece of evidence that the construction work is an acceptable activity. These are the soil samples from the additional 7 soil samples taken from 2 feet and 4 feet, and arsenic was not detected in any of those samples. And then lead and chromium was only found at background levels. So, this data is actually kind of useful for us to, verify our conceptual site model that the lead and the arsenic is really in that upper zone of the soil, and it's from the pesticide application, which is right on the ground. So, I don't know if many of you have heard of lead arsenic pesticides. They were actually widely used around the world for many, many decades. As I understand it, they were first used in Massachusetts in the late 1800s to control gypsy moths in apple orchards. So apple orchards and farms are a common place to find these types of residues, and also along rail trails and old railroad lines. Lead arsenic pesticides were pretty heavily used. They were banned in the 1980s, and I think the reason they were probably banned is because they were so persistent in the environment. And if you can imagine, lead and arsenic, they don't degrade naturally. So if you put that on the soil, they're going to stay there for a pretty long time. You can back up just for one second. So anyways, they were extensively used to control pests on crops, fruit trees, at rail yards, and for turf. So it's not uncommon at all to find these types of pesticide residues at those facilities and golf courses. So Highland Golf Club was founded many years ago. So again, the timing appears to be appropriate. It was a golf course for a long time when lead arsenic pesticides were being used. So I know there's been questions about the irrigation. It is true that water was taken from Mechanics Pond for apparently many decades, and Mechanics Pond is downstream of the Walton and Lonsbury site. At the Walton and Lonsbury site, the primary contaminants are volatile organics and chromium. Volatile organics, when they're discharged to the environment, and particularly discharged to water, they volatilize. I mean, that's why they're called that. So you really would not expect to see any of those VOC compounds in the surface water, let alone in the irrigation water. The chromium, again, it comes in 2 forms. Typically, the chromium-3, which is pretty insoluble, so it would typically not be found dissolved in water. And hexavalent chromium is a little more soluble and certainly could be found in that water. However, it typically does complex with organics once it's released into the open environment. But the truth is, we don't know really what was in that water as it's being used for irrigation. There's no way of knowing that. But we can well surmise that water being pumped and distributed across the golf course, if it had chromium in it, it would have landed on the ground, much like the pesticides did, and we would see it in that upper soil zone. So back to the sampling results, we specifically, yes, sir.
Do you have a question?
Yes, Doug, I live across the street from Mechanics Pond, and I see them sampling the water about every 3 to 6 months. So someone's maintaining a diary of the sampling of that water.
It's EPA, yep.
It is EPA, so there is a record of potential.
Well, there's a record, so they sample the surface water, which is, quite frankly, after the fact. And they do sample the sediment, which is where some of the contaminants settle down into. So
is there any value in what they've discovered?
yes. And I did speak with the project manager from EPA about this, and I mean, he didn't have much to add to it other than it's a situation that they weren't initially aware of. but they are aware of it now.
So the records are available to you?
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. President.
So at any rate, you know, in
Doug,
all
one
honesty,
second, we just have a clarify.
Just to add to Council Conti, is it possible for you to get us those results? I'd just be curious. I think we're on the right track there, Council.
well, the results are a library that's enormous. I'd be glad to send you, I can summarize certain things for you. I'd be
Sure.
glad to do that. And then I can send you links to the repository.
That'd be great. Thank you.
Okay, so I guess we're ready to move on then.
Just for further clarification with the water coming from Mechanics Pond, since the city has had possession of Highland, we have not been pumping any water from Mechanics Pond to the Highland Park now. In fact, the pump house doesn't even have a pump in it. It's not even physically possible. So in the entire time that the city's owned this, in fact, when the pump house was shut down in January of 2018, I believe it was, that's when the irrigation stopped. So there has not been any water from Mechanics Pond onto Highland Park since then.
Okay, so we'll talk about the regulatory situation a little bit. I know you heard me talk about the MCP, the Massachusetts Contingency Plan before. That is the set of regulations that really governs everything we do in Massachusetts for reporting, assessment, and cleanup. There are specific exemptions within the MCP for lots of different things, and releases of pesticides is one of them. It's one of the primary exemptions, and it's also actually in the statute of 21E. And those exemptions are complete, so it's for all reporting categories. And so we have different categories of reporting based on what we find and how sensitive it may be. But pesticides, provided they were applied in a manner consistent with their labeling, and that's what the regulations say, those are exempt from reporting. So, but despite that, I think we all agree and we all understand fully that you know, we want to understand any health risk, whether it's reportable or not. And DEP recognized that as well. So they've issued guidance and question and answer publications that address this very issue about, even though it's not reported, how do we put some understanding of risk on that. So I want to talk about this FS engineered report, and again, I understand the concern because of some of the statements. I will say that, you know, I've met the LSP who was the author of that report. I think he's a very bright guy. But in the world of LSPs, which I am one, there's a huge range of disciplines. There's engineering and there's toxicology and hydrogeology, and I think the fact is I just don't know that this was his area of expertise. And so there's some statements in this report that we really need to talk about so I can explain to you what the issue is. So these are quotes straight out of this report, and the first one is, the analytical results were also reviewed to evaluate if they pose an imminent hazard as discussed in the MCP. The fact is, the results were only reviewed to determine if they fit into that section of the MCP. Evaluating whether or not something is an imminent hazard is a much deeper subject, which I'm going to get into, but you don't just look at analytical results and say, is there an imminent hazard or not? Okay, so what that should have said was that the results were reviewed to determine if 40.0321 applies. So it's an important distinction, because when we're talking about imminent hazard, and that'll, I think, be in my next slide, it's got a very specific meaning. And I know people see that and say, imminent hazard, it must be really, really awful. But the fact is, under our regulations, it even says, with these circumstances, there could be an imminent hazard. But I'm going to explain that a little bit more.
Okay, hold on one second.
I just, in the copy that I have in front of me, and my poor eyesight, I can't see what that says, and I can't see it much better from my position here. Could you just read the darkened area for me?
That's it. That's on the next slide.
Okay.
Yeah, because I kind of purposely blacked it out because I just want to focus on the first statement.
Okay.
Okay?
I think it's helpful to understand the compare and contrast when you put the two of them both. That's all. And I just can't see it, even in my future.
I couldn't see it either, so. Okay. Okay, so here's the next part of that, which says specifically, the arsenic, lead, and chromium concentrations detected in the golf course official soil are interpreted to not trigger the 2-hour release notification obligation, blah, 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 because access is controlled by a fence. Again, just pointing out some things that just aren't right here. Lead is not even part of that section of the MCP. It's not in there. And chromium is also, the chromium concentrations we found were nowhere near that criteria. So again, it's just, unfortunately, it's poor writing, and it's just not being thorough and not doing an adequate job of the homework. And then again, I just have to, again, point out, you know, for this report to say that, that there could be some 2-hour release obligation, notification obligation, is simply not true. It's exempt from the regulations, and it's exempt under the statute. And the statute is really what drives all the regulations. Okay, and then one other thing which, you know, really kind of bothered me about this report is this statement here: a change in the use of the golf course property resulting in a parkland or a playground with unrestricted access to children and general public, so forth and so on, would require notification to DEP under the imminent hazard notification requirement.
On the previous slide, you mentioned it was exempt. Why is it exempt from section 21E?
The basic premise is that there are a number of situations in the environment which are considered background, and the regulations don't regulate background. And it's because it's pervasive, it's everywhere, and it's really not possible for DEP to regulate situations that are so widely used. I mean, you know, we're talking about golf courses and apple orchards, but I can tell you that there's lots of other properties where pesticides, I mean, lots of people use pesticides, and they have for many years. And it's just not possible for DEP to regulate every one of these situations. So that's why it's just not part of these regulations. But again, as I said, just because it's not in the regulations doesn't mean we're going to ignore it. I'm just trying to point out some of the things that are specifically wrong with this report and the wording of it, and how it shouldn't have been published like this.
So you're not saying that it's exempt, but it's the numbers were low enough that it doesn't meet the criteria? Is that what you're saying, or
any releases related to pesticides are exempt.
Okay.
Yes. But there's a section of the MCP that specifically talks about certain levels of arsenic and chromium that could pose an imminent hazard. But I'm going to talk a little bit more about what an imminent hazard really means. But those are for releases that would be under the MCP, and this is not.
So for other properties, these numbers may have exceeded the numbers, but because it's pesticides on a golf course, that's where the exception is? Is that what you're saying?
That's
Okay.
correct. Yep.
All right, now I understand.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. So these are some of the, this is basically what the MCP says on this matter. So imminent hazard is a specific term under the regulations, and it's got a definition, and there's lots of examples of what an imminent hazard is. And if, let's just say that this situation or any other situation is reportable to DEP, we've discovered these situations, and we call DEP within 2 hours, that's the rules. But the first thing that happens is that we're requested to do an imminent hazard evaluation. Okay, and that goes to my point earlier of, you know, you don't just look at sample results and say yes or no, it's an imminent hazard. You evaluate it, and specifically on that second point, this is what the regulations say about this. The focus of an imminent hazard evaluation shall be on the actual or likely exposures to human environmental receptors under current site conditions, considering current uses of the site and the surrounding environment, and considering appropriate short period of time. So right off the bat, you know, you would look at this situation and ask yourself, you know, what's going on at this property? Is there a situation where people are being exposed to this soil? And, you know, for a park where people are walking, I would say no. But we're going to, you want to ask me something?
I would like to reserve the option to just ask some additional questions with regards to use and how it is being used. Thank you.
Well, I have a more quantitative review of this, so we'll get through that
You know
whole.
what, if it's okay, I'll do it now. We'll just get it out of the way. So, so how we're utilizing the park right now is, you know, there are people walking there. I myself, I've walked there. We've had different projects. We had the Vietnam Wall. We had different things like that. Anytime the comment, you know, maybe you could highlight this. Some of the things that I read, even in your supplement, your evaluation of this initial report, stated that, you know, as long as there is not, you know, long-term exposure, 6 months or plus, then individuals would be deemed safe or whatever. What I haven't heard the conversation revolve around is that we do have city employees up there that have been digging since March. They've been removing golf cart areas. They're filling in sand traps. It's an everyday event. So as you're relaying this information, I would like to hear what their potential exposure would be in comparison to just simply installing the parking lot and people who go and walk their dogs up there. So if that could be part of the conversation as well, I'd appreciate it.
It is, yeah.
Thank you.
Yep. So I included on this slide, so you had asked about EPA and what they're doing. So I wanted to point out, just last summer, they issued this proposed plan, and it's on their website. I'll send you a link to it. But it's a good document because it talks about you know, what they found and what the options are for cleanup. And there's a whole section in there about risk assessment. That's actually very informative. It would be a good read to understand the process of risk assessment, and which is a quantitative exercise. But I thought this quote was appropriate. Just because contamination exists does not mean people or the environment are at risk. There has to be exposure to a contaminant to have a potential risk. So, but we're going to talk about what these exposure scenarios look like.
So Doug, if I may. So Doug, the United States EPA presentation in the Attleboro Public Library is available on their website, and they go through what they've learned so far and what they're going to propose to Congress for a cleanup. And I would encourage people listening to this to go to the United States EPA website, find the Attleboro Laundry site, and watch that presentation. Because it's very concise and it's very specific that the Superfund site has not reached the McAdams Pond, and it has not reached West Street, and that it is quite contained in the area surrounding the Walton Lonsby location.
Right.
So if there were fears of the Walton Lonsby site extending into a water source to irrigate the park while the park was open, I think that's unfounded.
Well, again, you know, nobody knows exactly what was in that water 40 years ago when Walton and Lonsbury was busy doing their thing and the river's flowing and on it goes.
Yep.
But, you know, as I said, the soil sampling, especially in that upper zone, I think that tells the story. That tells you, so, you know, we can theorize all we want about what may have been in that water, but the sampling results of that surface soil is going to be the most informative to us.
Thank you.
So, so far we've really only talked about the qualitative part of this. You know, what really is the exposure on a daily basis, or for park visitors or construction workers. But we do have quantitative ways to look at this. So Mass DEP has a whole library of what's called short forms, and they're fairly complex spreadsheets that estimate risk. And you know, there's probably a dozen of them. There's short forms for indoor air inhalation, residential use, but the ones that are most appropriate here are the construction worker and the park visitor. So what they do is they evaluate cancer risk and non-cancer risk. And the cancer risk is actually the excess cancer risk that is above and beyond our baseline cancer risk for just living on this planet, which is about 1 in 3. And so 1 in 3 is our baseline cancer risk, and both DEP and EPA have set a limit of 1 in 100,000 as being the acceptable level for excess cancer risk. Okay, so you have 1 in 3 cancer risk, and then what this estimating is that little bit above and beyond that. And you know, because it's cancer risk, it's cumulative, it's additive, and we want to keep that number as small as possible. But the 1 in 100,000 is the number that both EPA and DEP use to estimate acceptable risk. The non-cancer health risks here are, those are anything that's non-cancerous. It could be as simple as a headache or nausea, or it could be more serious internal organ effects, kidney damage, that sort of thing. But the non-cancer health effects they're threshold-based, which means if you're below that threshold, there's no effects, and if you're above it, there could be effects. So it's a little bit different from the cancer risk. And the number we're looking for on the non-cancer risk, the hazard index, is 1. So basically, if you're above 1, action is required. If you're below 1, there's no risk relative to the non-cancer. So all of the short forms have exposure assumptions built into them, and they're very conservative, as they should be, because qualitatively we try to guess, well, are people really being exposed? Are they getting it on their hands? Are they ingesting it? Are they breathing it? I think we can make some progress on the qualitative, but the quantitative is where we really get to our numbers. And so for the park visitor in particular, the short form assumes that a park visitor will ingest 50 to 100 milligrams of soil each visit, 3 times per week, 30 weeks per year, and for children it's 7 years, and for adults it's 16 years. So that's the assumption that's built into that particular short form. The construction worker has a little bit different set of assumptions, and I'll show you the short forms in just a second. But basically what you do is you put your contaminants in and your concentrations, and the short form takes these assumptions and it builds up the cancer risk and the non-cancer risk. And so for all the 2 short forms I did, all the results were below the acceptable levels. So let me show you what those look like. So this is the park visitor short form, and on the left is that whole list of compounds. Now I included, there was a couple other pesticides that were found in the initial 6 samples, DDT and chloridane and heptachlor, which again, those are exempt from notification. However, they're also well below the reporting criteria, so those were only found in very low concentrations. But I included them in the short form. You can see that column that says EPC, that's your exposure point concentration. That's the average that was in that first table I showed you. And then the next 3 columns, the ELCR, that's your excess lifetime cancer risk. And you can see that chromium and lead, those are not carcinogens, so they don't have a cancer risk. The other compounds do. And then the following, all the other columns there are the chronic and subchronic hazard indexes. So up at the upper right corner where it says calculated risk, that's kind of the summary of the whole short form. And the ELCR is, in this case, for the park visitor, 10 to the minus 6, whereas 10 to minus 5 is our allowable level. And then the chronic index is, the hazard index is below 1 in both the chronic and the subchronic. Next. And then this is the construction worker short form. So it's the same idea, but it's a little different set of exposure assumptions. This assumes that a construction worker is there every day for 6 months. The assumption is that there's more exposure, but it's for a shorter duration. So in this case, we actually do, this short form does calculate potential exposure from dust in addition to ingestion. And ingestion can be anything from dermal contact, it gets through your skin to, it's on your hands and you have lunch. And, so there's a couple different ways that can happen, so. But the calculated risk levels for the construction work are actually even a little bit lower than the park visitor.
If I may, it just says based on construction workers 18 to 25 years of age. Is there a different set of numbers for people who are older than that, or construction workers that are older
No.
than that?
No, there
So why would it just be solely in that 6-year time frame?
I don't know. It's probably where most of their data comes from, because, these are all, like, all the risk numbers that are built under this are all based on, animal studies primarily, and other studies, and basically they take that information and try to build it up into the human population. I mean, I don't know really why they would choose one group or the other.
Just as in comparison, it's like the park visitor is from age 1 to 31, and they make those other subsequent changes. I just think that's interesting, that it would only be on the population that would generally be healthier, and things like that, and then make these kind of number assumptions on that.
Yep. Well, I think when they include the children for the park visitor, that's the most sensitive age group. So that's why.
I understand that portion, but again, if you're a construction worker, you're 18 to 25 compared to a 47-year-old construction worker that has other life experiences with things like that, what that exposure would be like for them, and if that would be reflected, if there would be a change reflected in that because of those external circumstances.
Yeah, I honestly don't know. I mean, I can tell you, from this whole process to run through the short forms, and I was actually, when I got the exposure assessment just this morning, that was great news, and it really, it showed to me that this is even more conservative, which is great. That's what we want. But when you can go out there for a day and you're digging and moving soil around, and there's nothing detected in that cartridge they're wearing, I think that's great. So, the last slide, I think, is, as promised, here's my contact information. You can call me, email me. I'm going to put the slides up on my website, which is right there. And then I really do want you all have Gerard's contact information. He's familiar with this situation, and he'd be glad to take your call if you need to talk to the regulator about this.
Thank you. Any questions?
I have several. So perhaps maybe you could share with us why, so as our residents are aware, we're doing an abatement over at Finburn Field for lead. So how is this different than that project?
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you.
My apologies, I have
No, I know
allergies,
yeah.
and so I'm very raspy these days. So I've been asked a couple of questions, and where I have access to here, some of residents have asked me some questions. So, we're currently making changes to Finburg Field. That's been a process that you've been involved in for quite a while.
Oh, Finburg, yeah, right.
Yeah, Finburg Field. So how are the lead levels at Highland different than what was at Finburg Field that triggered that?
I think they're a small fraction of what's at Finburg.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. To your knowledge, if the park wasn't changed into a park, that we didn't accept it, purchase it, and make it into a park, and a contractor purchased it, would they be able to build out there without a remediation?
That's a great question, because it happens all the time. Apple orchards get converted to housing developments, and it's happened, and the fact is that it's still not reportable to DEP. Their recommendations and the suggestions by DEP are, they're available for developers and homeowners to look at, and most of it's pretty common sense stuff. It's just cover it over or provide some landscaping, but the fact is that it's just not regulated.
What specifically is it?
So if there was an apple orchard that was being turned into...
So we're not talking about an apple orchard, we're talking about this particular piece of...
This property?
This particular property.
Mm-hmm.
The golf course. If things went differently and the city of Attleboro didn't purchase it and it was sold to a developer, in your professional opinion, before they were able to make modifications and build homes at that location, would they be able to do that, or would they have been required due to the data that we have in front of us, and you wear multiple hats in your processing of this information, would they have been able to build without a remediation?
There would be no regulation against it.
No regulation against them being able to build without the remediation, is that what you're saying?
Yes.
Okay. And so, do we have a current, so your report in response to the initial report discussed a soil management plan.
Yep.
Could you highlight what the soil management plan, what the protocols are for that, and whether or not that information has been disseminated to all the interested and invested parties?
Okay, the answer to the last part is yes. So the soil management plan's been shared with all of the construction people? Is that what you're asking?
The construction people, the superintendent, the city workers?
Oh, yes, I've met with Derek.
Okay.
So he's aware of it, yep. The soil management plan that I wrote was, I think, pretty factual, even on looking back at it several months now, and with all else I've learned. In fact, I think it's even more conservative now that I've seen the exposure assessment, and I've now seen that the EPC across this whole property is within residential standards. I think that's great news. But, you know, there's always the recommendation, I guess, in that case, to take the extra precaution if you want. Wear the gloves when, you know, instead of getting your hands in that soil, wear gloves, which I think happens a lot of time anyways. And, you know, if you're uncomfortable with dust, then wear a dust mask. You know, dust has other harmful properties than what may be, you know, the arsenic. I mean, the silica part of the dust is, quite frankly, worse. And so, you know, a construction worker to wear a dust mask for convenience and comfort, I think, is wise. So there's nothing wrong with that.
Would it be possible for you, to send your soil management plan to our administrative assistant to disseminate to us? Because I'll be honest with you, over the course of the last couple of weeks, I've been out there, there were multiple people working out there, and they did not have that information. So I think it would be very helpful for us in the event that those things happen. We could potentially share that with them.
Yes, I can do that, and again, my apologies for kind of the timing of all this. The exposure assessment just came to my desk this morning.
This isn't a reflection on you. I'm just
but I am planning on issuing a report on the subsequent findings, because that's not published at all. And you know, I think within that report, I can summarize these short forms for all uses. So yeah, it is out there, and I can put it on my website. We can get it out as much as you want.
Thank you.
Council Conti, did I see your hand in between?
No.
Council Dolan.
Hi. So Gerard Martin, so he's Mass DEP. Does anybody confirm your figures? Does somebody in DEP confirm all the work that you've done? Validate
Not
it?
specifically, no. Again, if this was reportable to DEP and we are within that MCP system, it would actually still be under this LSP program. So, and the way it works in Massachusetts is licensed site professionals. We have a license to do this kind of work. I have all my work reviewed internally in my company, but that is the license that I hold, and I've been doing this since 1995. So I think I have a pretty good level of experience at it. But again, my discussions with Gerard, since it's not part of the MCP, he doesn't have regulatory authority over it, but because he is a true partner with this city and with the ARA, he's been very glad to step into that, somewhat advisory role for me, so I can just call him and say, hey, Gerard, this is what I'm thinking. As I said, we're on the same page completely on this. So I haven't shared these short forms with him, but those are pretty straightforward. But I have certainly talked to him about the overall issue here of the reporting obligations and what is typically done at properties like this.
So you calculate everything, and if it's reportable, it's your duty to report it to DEP if they came in as reportable?
Well, the calculations of the short form are not something that's reportable. What's reportable is If you collect a soil sample or a groundwater sample and it's above a certain level for a certain compound, we have a whole huge table of reportable concentrations. However, in that same set of regulations, it outlines releases that are not reportable, that are exempt from reporting, and that's where that pesticide release, pesticide exemption comes from. So the fact that it's from pesticides, it's not within the regulatory system. And there's other releases like, quite frankly, lead paint that might flake off your house onto the soil. If you take a soil sample next to a residential home and it's got lead in it, that's not reportable either, because again, it's just in the regulator's mind, it's considered background because it's very pervasive in our environment.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments for Doug at this time? Council Coles?
The chromium levels that were discovered, is that typical for residential property as well, or is it higher than normal, generally speaking?
The total chromium numbers are, I would say, slightly above background, but not, they were nowhere near the residential standards. The hexavalent chromium, you don't see a lot of that, outside of a site. So, it's possible that is related to the irrigation water. I really don't know, but again, to look at those numbers and to see the distribution of it, we didn't find it in most of the samples, and it was at very, very low levels at a couple of the other samples.
Well, and it looked like the samples done at the parking lot area were significantly higher than the 10 samples done later.
A little bit.
Throughout.
Yep. So
I mean, we're talking above, 57, 45.
Well, there's a range, right.
Yeah.
So even in the parking lot area, some of them were very, very low,
And
some of them were higher, yeah. So is that a function of the application of the pesticide in that particular area? Probably, yeah.
But when averaged together with all of them, it's then below the reportable numbers. Okay.
Well, it's below that residential risk. So the reporting criteria is a maximum. So if you go over the reporting criteria on one sample, it's reportable. And I think the intent with Mass DEP is that they want those sorts of situations to come into the regulations, and they want LSPs and other professionals to evaluate it. So to not make snap decisions on one sample result or whatever. So the intent of the regulations is really to capture a lot of these sites, let us evaluate it, let us write it up, and then we LSPs have the ability to write opinions on, well, does this present a risk or not a risk? And that's when a lot of these sites leave the regulatory system with, it's called a permanent solution statement. So that's the opinions that we write that, document that the assessment is thorough and that it meets the standards. It's much like an engineer or a surveyor or somebody else with a license, would have that ability to render those opinions.
Council Water?
Thank you for everything you've shared with us. I appreciate it. I was called by a family on Rathbun Willard that lives this week, and I went over and I spoke with them. I looked at the area where the parking lot would be going in with the workers. And there was, I would say, some fear on the parts of some people that I spoke to, especially parents of young children. And I'm just asking if you could allay their fears. If the parking lot was dug up and there were piles of dirt, would there be any danger for children if that dirt somehow became airborne in the direction of where they live?
So it's a very fair question. I think first of all, in the soil management plan, we specifically address the requirements that we want them to take, which is they're going to put the soil in piles, and they're going to cover it with a fabric that keeps it contained until it can be vegetated, and then it's really no different than the rest of the golf course. So it's that vegetation on top of the soil that kind of keeps it bound together and keeps it from being airborne.
Okay, thank you.
So, just another, Mr. Waterman's questions actually triggered something to remember by. If we're taking vegetation from that location and transplanting it across the city, is there a concern for that?
Is that in the plans?
It's happening.
Oh,
So perhaps, so we do have we have the park department is stationed at Highland Country Club, which we were all grateful for. It provides security and things like that, and they're managing it to the best of their abilities. It is, I walk at Capon Park every single day, and I see different things that are happening, and I have a variety of conversations. And so I'm aware that there are plants and trees and shrubs, and even the vegetation that they put up for the Vietnam Moving Wall this weekend they were planted in the ground. They're being dug up and put at other locations throughout the city. Does that cause a problem?
I mean, I honestly think that's just such a minute, if you wanted to really look at the amount of soil that's there, and I would think that's a very minute. I met with Derek Corsi, is it? I met with him about a month ago, and we talked about this, and I knew that he had removed some of the cart paths, which was just asphalt. I wasn't told about any vegetation transplants. So I guess I'd like to know a little bit more about that, but my sense is that all the exposure assumptions we talked about here with these short forms, that's fairly significant. It's consistent exposure over a long period of time, and so the example of a plant gets dug up and moved somewhere, my sense is that really wouldn't be much to be concerned about. The short forms really, I think, hopefully get the point across that exposure here is consistent and over a long period of time, and even that, it's still in our acceptable limits.
That was something that I was like, there's questions. Would there be the possibility now that we're spreading it across the city, which would cause a problem of us being able to control what's actually happening? Yeah. Excuse my voice. And maybe perhaps you could share, being that we don't all have it. I was just trying to scroll through. I was using my phone to scroll through your soil management. Okay. So that maybe you could. I know that it is going to go out to us, but however, there are individuals that live in the vicinity that are watching what's happening in that particular location with moving of soil. Mm-hmm. What is the soil management suggestions and recommendations for that? If we're filling in sand traps, if we're excavating to put in the parking lot, things like that, yep. How should that be maintained? Maybe that would be.
So the construction people, now that they've done their exposure assessment, they've been able to move around soil and measure that, and that's been great news. So I think that's a good piece of information to share with people. The soil management plan, it talks about worker protection, simple stuff like gloves, but it also specifically talks about dust, and if dust becomes a problem, then spraying water on is very commonly used at all construction sites to control dust. So that's specifically in the plan, and I do believe that the construction contractor, in fact, I'm positive they will be monitoring for dust. You've seen us working down at Reynolds and Markman for a couple months now. We've been monitoring the dust, every minute we've been working for that very reason. So we have, a health and safety plan that has very specific dust levels in it, and when we even approach those dust levels, we spray. We get the water on it and keep the dust down, and it's been very effective. We actually monitor that data, and we can see on a hot, windy day the dust starts creeping up, and then it just gets cut right off. So I'll certainly make the suggestion that the contractors share that dust monitoring plan. I think that would be very helpful.
Council Jack.
Thank you. Hi, Doug. So bottom line, you're telling us Highland Park is environmentally safe.
Yes.
Great. That's what I wanted to know. Through all this arsenic, chromium, lead topics. Yes, thanks.
Okay. Thank you. Any other questions? Thank you. Thanks, Doug. Mayor, did you want to?
Thank you, Mr. President. When this information about the FS report was brought to me by Jack Jacoby and Gail Clark in early May, my first thought was, do we need to close down Highland Park? It was the very first thing I asked Jack and Gail. So I didn't know the answer to that, and so that's why I contacted Doug, because for the past 14 or 15 years, he's been the city's LSP. And like any other department head, he acts in a capacity like a department head, and he's the subject matter expert. He's who I listen to. You just heard over an hour presentation from Doug on a lot of things, you know, that he and I have talked about. There's only one thing that was actually news to me in this presentation this evening, and that was that a developer would not have to do any soil remediation. That was news to me because when I had talked to Bill Ward about this, Bill had said, my gosh, we dodged a bullet because it would have bankrupted if we had to remediate the soil. But as Doug just explained, this is actually below what Bill and I initially even thought was a reason for concern for housing development, which is a good thing. So, but the people who use Highland Park, the employees who work there, and the parking lot, those are people that would all be affected by the use of this. When we purchased Highland Park, and that was something we did, that was a real high moment in our city's history. It was something that we really should take a lot of pride in. This is something that is our legacy. It's something that every one of you voted for. It's something that I pushed, even after initially not being interested in it. I listened to the department heads and they changed my mind within about literally 3 minutes of why it was a good idea. But this is something that we should be really proud of. And we recently had a cross-country meet there with 22 schools. It's going to be the first invitational. We also had the moving wall there recently. We had tons of volunteers there. I would like to eventually build a performing arts venue there. This is something that is a great source of pride for us. And there are a lot of rumors and a lot of, quite frankly, a lot of fear and intentional fear-mongering circulating what we are supposed to be proud of. Now that you've heard from Doug Healy, he's who I listen to. He knows more about this, quite frankly, than all of us in this room put together. I would hope that the 11 of you will participate in easing any concerns that are floating around in the public. When President Cooper talked to me about this 3 or 4 weeks ago, he's had a couple questions. I said, Mark, let's just bring Doug in to ease the concerns of the council. And that's exactly what we did. So, as I said before, Highland Park is something we should be proud of. Councilor Jackson asked the most, put it in its simplest terms, is Highland Park safe? And Doug Healy, the city's LSP for the past 14, 15 years, said yes. Let's make sure the public knows that so that the public can be proud of that addition to our city, because it's a real valuable addition, and for generations to come, if not centuries.
Any questions for the mayor?
So,
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Mr. Council.
Excuse me. I am going to refer this matter to the Zoning and Land Use Committee for any follow-up that councilors may have, any questions, any feedback from DEP can be followed through and circulated as we wait for Doug's final report on this issue, and any of the takeaways can be sent to the council. And then when it's sent, I'll send it also assigned to Zoning and Land Use for a final outcome of the.
Perfect. And that's the most important thing, is I'd like to see the actual report as opposed to the PowerPoint.
Yeah. Perfect. And Doug's committed to providing that information to us. So, thank you. Any other questions regarding this matter? Great. Thank you very much. Thank you. So there are no public hearings this evening. There are no continued public hearings this evening. We are moving right along to the reading of the mayor's communication.
October 1st, 2019, dear municipal councilors. In accordance with our ordinances, vehicles are prohibited from parking on the easterly side of 2nd Street for longer than 3 hours at any time between the hours of 7 a.m. and 12 p.m., Monday through Friday, except legal holidays. See ordinance 10-5.3Q. This restriction has served the city well by preserving free short-term parking spaces for residents and customers of local businesses, while at the same time discouraging long-term commuter parking. Surprisingly, our ordinances do not contain the same restriction for the easterly side of First Street. Not surprisingly, vehicles, often commuters, habitually park on First Street all day long. Please see attached photograph. The lack of any time restrictions on First Street is inconsistent with those found on Second Street and unfairly exclude parking opportunities for visitors to nearby homes and businesses. Therefore, I hereby respectfully request that you submit to the Municipal Council the following changes to the city's ordinances. Add the following line in section 10-5.3Q in alphabetical order. First Street easterly side from County Street to Grove Street. Furthermore, I hereby request your honorable body to hold a public hearing at the appropriate time on the above ordinance changes.
Thank you. Transportation and Traffic Committee and Vice President Pruitt, would you like to send that to the Traffic Study Commission as well? Thank you. And then after that, we'll do the public hearing. Yeah, because I didn't have the date, and depending on what day. All right.
President Cooper, we actually have our meeting on Thursday evening, so I'll be able to
Great.
refer that to
And then we can call forward in committee if you have any additional information. Perfect, thank you. Did you get that? Transportation and Traffic and Traffic Study
Oh, we
Commission.
gonna call for a public hearing?
Not at this
Not
time.
yet, okay, thank you. I didn't get that.
Okay.
For your information, I regret to inform your honorable body that we have received the resignation of Lauren Haru Cameron from the Council on Substance Abuse. Please join me in thanking Ms. Haru Cameron for her service to the city. I respectfully submit for confirmation by your honorable body the appointment of Andrew Wayland, 39 Emerald Lane, to fill an unexpired term on the Council on Substance Abuse Prevention. Term to expire February 2020. Copies in your packet.
Personal and Human Services Committee, please.
I respectfully submit a communication from Superintendent of Public Works, Michael Tyler, regarding the need for funds to complete the state-mandated emergency action plans associated with Farmers Pond Dam and Mechanics Pond Dam. Therefore, I hereby request your honorable body transfer $14,700 from account Citywide Reserve Fund for transfer to account Public Works Professional Services. Upon approval, the available balance in Reserve Fund for transfer will be $168,585.23. Copies in your packets.
Public Works Committee, please.
I respectfully submit a communication from Superintendent of Wastewater Thomas Hayes regarding need for funds to fiscal year 2019 invoices from CDM Smith totaling $8,484.86. Therefore, I hereby request your honorable body to transfer $8,484.86 from account Wastewater Enterprise Fund Reserve Fund for transfer to account Wastewater Enterprise Fund bills from previous years. Upon approval, the available balance in the Reserve Fund for transfer will be $28,015.14. Copies in your packets.
Public Works Committee, please.
I respectfully request your honorable body to hold a public hearing on Tuesday, October 22nd, 2019, which is a special meeting for the purpose of setting the tax classification for fiscal year 2020. Additionally, and in order to ensure that the city has sufficient time to prepare and mail the third quarter real estate tax bills by December 31st, 2019, I further request that your honorable body hold another special meeting of the Municipal Council on Tuesday, November 12th, 2019, for the purpose of voting the percentage of the local tax levy to be borne by each class of property for fiscal year 2020.
Budget and Appropriations Committee, please. And Jay, in your next committee meeting, you'll have to, I asked the mayor's office through Virginia to call for these special meetings, but we just need to verify that that's been done and everybody's noticed appropriately.
Sure.
Because they're two in the same, and I don't want anything to get confabulated, so let's just keep tabs on it.
So we're
not gonna call for it right now.
Not yet, okay,
Because there's
beautiful.
no notice for the special
Yep.
meeting.
After recent inspection of the two boilers at City Hall, it was determined that both 20-year-old boilers need to be replaced. Although we do not have a final price, I am requesting the funds now in order to move the process along. Additionally, as the warm weather will soon be changing and City Hall will need heat, I ask that this request be considered as an emergency. Therefore, I hereby request your honorable body transfer $35,420 from account Citywide Reserve Fund for transfer to account Citywide Boiler Replacement. Upon approval, the available balance in the Reserve Fund for transfer will be $133,000. $165.23. In accordance with Article 2, Section 2-9B of the City Charter of the City of Attleboro, I respectfully request your honorable body to consider this as an emergency measure.
City Property and Claims Committee, please.
I respectfully submit a communication from Superintendent of Public Works, Michael Tyler, regarding the award of the Peckham Street Culvert Replacement Grant from the Division of Ecological Restoration in the amount of $28,500 towards the field data collection to replace the culvert. Please note that there is no matching requirement. In accordance with Chapter 1, Section 12 of the revised ordinances of the City of Attleboro, I hereby request your honorable body approve expending of such funds in any future grant amendments. Copies in your packets.
Public Works Committee, please.
Respectfully submit a communication from Superintendent of Schools David Sawyer regarding the donation of a Yamaha YPG-235-76 portable keyboard with an estimated value of $280 and a Pile PTED-017 pad drum machine with an approximate value of $130 to the Coelho Music Class from Kyle Harris. In accordance with Section 1-12 of the revised ordinances of the City of Attleboro, I hereby request your honorable body to accept this generous donation to the City of Attleboro. Copies in your packets.
City Property and Claims Committee, please.
Sincerely, Paul Haru, Mayor.
Thank you. Moving on to other communications.
Yes, we received an email communication from Pamela Folan of Harvard Street requesting a reconsideration of closing Harvard Street, currently used as a driveway to Fian High School.
Traffic and Transportation Committee, please, and Traffic Study Commission as well.
Sure.
Perfect. Thank you. Did you get that, Steve?
Yes. We also received an application from Manuel Amaral of 23 Morris Avenue, Attleboro, for Tri-Town Auto Sales at 1850 County Street with 4 customer parking spaces and 16 display spaces.
I think it's 6 display spaces, but License Committee, please.
It's the first of many that are gonna be coming into Class 2.
Yes.
Yeah. We also received a Class 3 application from Manuel Amaral of 23 Morris Avenue, Attleboro, for Tri-Town Auto Sales at 1850 County Street with 4 customer parking spaces and 6 display spaces.
Thank you. License Committee as well.
And that is all.
Thank you. George, put it in the paper. It's time for car dealer license renewal.
They're coming.
With that, we'll move right along to the committee report, starting to my left with Council Jackson.
Thank you, Mr. President. Reporting for the Public Works Committee. In the docket of October 1st, 2019, I move to approve the request of the Department of Public Works to pay 2 fiscal year 19 invoices to Aggregate Industries in the amount of $195.87 from Chapter 90 funds and $454.19 from deficit snow spending.
Second.
Thank you. Motions in order. Any questions or comments?
No, I think we discussed this last week. No other comments?
Great. Roll call vote is required, and we'll begin with Councilor Blair.
Mr. Blair?
Yes.
Ms. Holmes?
Yes.
Ms. Dolan?
Yes.
Mr. Delicio?
Yes.
Vice President Parika?
Yes.
Mr. Kovas?
Yes.
Mr. Conti?
Yes.
Mr. Waterman?
Yes.
Mrs. Jackson?
Yes.
President Cooper?
Yes.
10 yeas, 0 nays.
Thank you. Motion passes.
And I know you all have been wondering and just saying, jeepers, I wonder if they've finished off that Farmers Pond Dam, and it's all done. It's all fixed and repaired. They did it within a week, and it looks absolutely beautiful. With that, I have no other business this evening, but would like to call for a committee meeting at the appropriate time next week.
Great. Thank you. Council Waterman.
Yes, reporting from the Personnel and Human Services Committee on the docket of October 1st, 2019. I move to approve the confirmation of Mary Flaherty, 358 South Main Street, Attleboro, to fill a 3-year term on the Disability Commission, term to expire February 2022.
Second.
Thank you. Motions in order. Any questions or comments?
We talked about last week. I've talked to Mary this weekend. She's very excited about getting on this commission.
Great. Any other questions or comments? Seeing none, voice vote is required. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you. Motion passes.
Please note 10 to 0.
Yes.
And from the docket of October 1st, 2019, I also move to approve the confirmation of Verity Preston, 121 West Street in Attleboro, to fill an expired term on the Attleboro Youth Commission, term to expire February 2021.
Second.
Thank you. Motions in order. Any questions or comments?
I spoke with Verity's parents this weekend, and she is very excited, and she is hoping to attend next week just to meet with us briefly at beginning around 7.
Perfect. Any other questions or comments? Seeing none, a voice vote is required. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you, motion passes.
That concludes the business of the Personnel and Human Services Committee. I would like to call the next meeting at the next appropriate time.
Great, thank you, Council Conti.
Thank you, Mr. President. Reporting for Capital Improvement City Development Committee. From the docket of October 1st, 2019, I move to transfer $50 from the citywide reserve fund for transfer to the mayor's membership to pay an increase in MAPPO membership fees, which is for the purchasing department.
Second.
Thank you, motion's in order.
Yes, Mr. President, as I reported last week, many of the restaurants are increasing their fees to groups to meet in their organizations, have increased dues as a result, and this is a dues increase for our capital improvements project manager to participate in the purchasing professionals organization, which is highly beneficial, and I urge the council's approval. That concludes my comments.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? Seeing none, roll call vote is required, and we'll begin with Council Jackson.
Ms. Jackson?
Yes.
Mr. Waterman?
Yes.
Mr. Conti?
Yes.
Mr. Cobus?
Yes.
Vice President Parika?
Yes.
Mr. Delissio?
Yes.
Ms. Dolan?
Yes.
Ms. Reynolds?
Yes.
Ms. Holmes?
Yes.
Mr. Blair? President Cooper?
Yes.
11 yeas, 0 nays.
Thank you, motion passes.
That concludes the business the Capital Improvement City Development Committee has to bring before the committee council this evening. We look forward to a meeting next week.
Great, thank you. Council Cobus.
Reporting for Zoning and Land Use Committee from the docket of September 17th, 2019. I move to accept the grant of easement from Bay State Gas Company, DBA Columbia Gas of Massachusetts for property designated on the City Assessor's Map 43, Lot 234 and Lot 280 for the purpose of pipeline replacement at Capron Park Zoo located at 201 County Street, Attleboro.
Second.
Thank you, motion's in order. Any questions or comments?
We spoke about this last week. As I mentioned, the easement's been reviewed by the solicitor and they're okay with it, as well as I also talked to the mayor about it, and his comments were the lines in front of Capron Park under County Street are routine scheduled replacement. The lines going into Capron are also routine scheduled replacement. While at it, they are extending the service lines to a couple new exhibits in the zoo.
Perfect. Any other comments or questions? Seeing none, a roll call vote is required, and we'll begin with Council Blair.
Mr. Blair?
Yes.
Ms. Holmes?
Yes.
Ms. Reynolds?
Yes.
Ms. Dolan?
Yes.
Mr. Delissio?
Yes.
Vice President Parika?
Yes.
Mr. Cobus?
Yes.
Mr. Conti?
Yes.
Mr. Waterman?
Yes.
Ms. Jackson?
Yes.
President Cooper?
Yes.
11 yeas, 0 nays.
Thank you, motion passes.
That concludes business for the Zoning and Land Use Committee. I call for the committee meeting at the next appropriate time.
Thank you. Vice President Parika.
Thank you. Reporting for Traffic and Transportation Committee, I have 3 motions this evening, and please accept my apologies for my voice. That sounds like Bobby Greedy. From the docket of October 1st, 2019, I move to accept the following resolution of support. I'd like to waive the reading.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, I am.
Thank you. So, as we discussed in committee last week, it was voted out of committee. This is a letter of support to forward on to the state to urge the completion of repairs to the South Attleboro MBTA station. I did leave it open to accept any amendments if anybody had any additional concerns, but so I think it's fine as is, but I'm happy to hear anything besides.
Any other questions or comments? Who seconded?
Second.
Me.
Ms. Kate.
Kate, thank you. All right, any other questions or comments? Thank you. Seeing none, Mike got cut off, but I'm sure it's a roll call vote. That's what we're gonna do, just because mine was cut off. And the vote will begin with Council Jackson.
Ms. Jackson?
Yes.
Mr. Waterman?
Yes.
Mr. Conti?
Yes.
Mr. Cobus?
Yes.
Vice President Parika?
Yes.
Mr. Delissio?
Yes.
Ms. Reynolds?
Yes.
Ms. Holmes?
Yes.
Mr. Blair?
Yes.
President Cooper?
Yes,
10 yeas, 0 nays.
thank you, motion passes.
Thank you very much. That, I had spoken with Virginia. She'll have this resolution prepared for next Tuesday for us to sign. Thank you. From the docket of September 3rd, 2019, I move to approve the installation of a stop sign on Bliss Avenue at Vaughan Avenue, and to add this information to section 10-4.11 of the revised ordinances of the city of Attleboro.
Second.
Thank you. Motion's in order. And comments?
Thank you. We discussed it in committee. At that time, I would like to make a friendly amendment to add the language of the section 10-4.11, because that was left off when I read it in committee.
I'll accept that as a friendly amendment.
Thank you very much. Second. Other than that, we discussed it at length with regards to this, and I think it would be helpful for the residents of the neighborhood.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions? Seeing none, our roll call vote is required, and we'll begin with Council Blair.
Mr. Blair?
Yes.
Ms. Holmes?
Yes.
Ms. Reynolds?
Yes.
Ms. Dolan?
Yes.
Mr. Delissio?
Yes.
Vice President Perica?
Yes.
Mr. Clovis?
Yes.
Conti?
No.
Mr. Waterman?
Yes.
Ms. Jackson?
Yes.
President Cooper?
Yes.
10 yeas, 1 nay.
Thank you. Motion passes.
Thank you. From the docket of September 3rd, 2019, I move to approve the installation of a stop sign on Bourne Avenue at South Main Street, and to add the information, section 10-4.11 of the revised ordinances of the city of Attleboro.
Second.
Thank you. Motion's in order.
Again, a friendly amendment for the adding the section 10-4.11.
Second.
Thank you.
Again, this, we did, as I didn't mention previously, we did have public hearings with regards to this. Both stop signs were supported by the Traffic Study Commission. We did have individuals from the neighborhood come and speak in support of it, so I will be supporting it with the full council.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions? Seeing none, our roll call vote is required, and we'll begin with Council Jackson.
Ms. Jackson?
Yes.
Mr. Waterman?
Yes.
Mr. Conti?
Yes.
Mr. Clovis?
Yes.
Vice President Perica?
Yes.
Mr. Delissio?
Yes.
Ms. Dolan?
Yes.
Ms. Reynolds?
Yes.
Ms. Holmes?
Yes.
Mr. Blair?
Yes.
President Cooper?
Yes.
11 yeas, 0 nays.
Thank you. Motion passes.
Thank you. Just as a quick little update, now that school is in full swing, I've had multiple conversations with the police chief and with Mr. Rooney, where we've increased the Bushy Street parking lot from 100 spots to 300 spots. It's a little bit congested back there, so everyone needs to behave a little bit better when they're, but within very short order, there will be a temporary stop sign installed at the end of Bushy Street just prior to entering into the Bushy Street parking lot at the high school, so please be aware of that. There will be a restriction on Hawthorne and at an adjacent street, parking on one side, because the Gatra buses need to come in and make the swing. So just be aware, the residents that are in that area in the mornings, there will be some changes, so keep your eyes peeled for that. Other than that, I have no business. That concludes the business for transportation and traffic for this evening. Call for committee meeting at the next appropriate time.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you. Reporting for budget and appropriations from the docket of October 1st, 2019, I move to approve the payment of the previous year's school bills totaling $5,038.72 for the Attleboro Public Schools. The fiscal obligations were not received in time to be processed in the normal fiscal 2019 business cycle.
Second.
Thank you. Motion's in order.
Thank you. First of all, I want to thank Todd for pinch hitting for me last week. Secondly, this is, as we've been doing this year, this is, these bills came in prior to the after the close of fiscal 19, so it needs council approval to be paid.
Any questions or comments? Seeing none, a roll call vote is required, and we'll begin with Council Blair.
Mr. Blair?
Yes.
Ms. Holmes?
Yes.
Ms. Reynolds?
Yes.
Ms. Dolan?
Yes.
Mr. Delissio?
Yes.
Vice President Perica?
Yes.
Mr. Clovis?
Yes.
Mr. Conti?
Yes.
Mr. Waterman?
Yes.
Ms. Jackson?
Yes.
President Cooper?
Yes.
11 yeas, 0 nays.
Thank you. Motion passes.
Thank you, and that is all the business for budget and appropriations. We'd like to call for a meeting next week at the appropriate time.
Thank you. Council Dolan?
License Committee has no business this evening. May I speak for a second? May I say something?
Absolutely. You can do what you want. It's all you.
So, just a little mention about the moving wall this past week. I just wanted to say thank you to everybody that was involved. Like, there were so many volunteers and the steering committee, like the amount of planning that went into this and the results, and I mean, the people that got stuck out in the parking lot and didn't get to participate, but they were still out there volunteering, even though they didn't get to see anything, to the lighting, to the steering committee planning everything. It was amazing. It was beautiful. The landscape was beautiful, the lighting, the speakers, just everything. I've never been more proud to be part of the city than I am right now. It was just, the amount of work that everybody put into this was just amazing. I mean, people working overnights in the cold, just sitting there, probably not necessarily alone, but it was just, I was just glad to be any part of it at all. So I just wanted to thank everybody.
Thank you.
And I look forward to a meeting at the next appropriate time.
Great, thank you. Council Reynolds.
Reporting for City Property and Claims Committee, I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 items, and one of them is an emergency preamble one. So, from the docket of October 1st, 2019, I move to declare surplus and available for disposition the following water meters from the Water Department. There is 200 of them, and they're used.
Second.
Thank you. Motion's in order. Any additional comments? Any comments? Seeing none, we need a roll call vote, beginning with Councilor Jackson.
Ms. Jackson?
Yes.
Mr. Waterman?
Yes.
Mr. Conti?
Yes.
Mr. Cobus?
Yes.
Vice President Parika?
Yes.
Ms. Dolan?
Yes.
Ms. Reynolds?
Yes.
Ms. Holmes?
Yes.
Mr. Blair?
Yes.
President Cooper?
Yes.
10 yeas, 0 nays.
Thank you. Motion passes.
From the docket of October 1st, 2019, I move to accept the donation of $100 in restaurant gift cards from an anonymous donor. Outreach Case Manager Renee Binjor and Public Health Nurse Jackie O'Brien will offer these cards to individuals and families in need.
Second.
Thank you. Motion's in order. Any additional questions or comments?
No, I do
Seeing
not.
none, a voice vote is required. All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. Motion passes 10-0.
From the docket of October 1st, 2019, I move to approve the generous donation of a Jugs hockey machine with an estimated value of $1,485 from the Rebecca Lynn Whitefield Foundation to the Attleboro High School Field Hockey Program.
Second.
Thank you. Motion's in order. Any additional comments?
No, I do not.
This also requires a voice vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you. Motion passes 10-0.
From the docket of October 10th, 2019, this is the emergency preamble. I move that the Attleboro Municipal Council vote to take action as provided in the city charter, section 2-9B, regarding the emergency which presently exists relative to the request of the mayor to transfer $35,420 from account 11241000578300 citywide reserve fund for transfer to account 587054 citywide boiler replacement to replace failing city hall boilers. Due to time constraints involved, cold weather approaching, the nature of the emergency makes it necessary to take action without waiting the prescribed time as provided in the city charter.
Second.
Thank you. Motion is in order. Any additional comments?
I just have a little concern that we're doing it as an emergency, quite frankly. I mean, in one breath, there was something we read here tonight that, we don't know what the real amount is, yet it's an emergency. I would think if it's an emergency, we would find out what it's really costing us. I don't know why it has to be an emergency. I question whether it's an emergency. I mean, we don't have cold weather yet. We could find out how much it is really gonna cost us, and then it could come down. I mean, I don't know if other people have that concern. Counselor Cooper?
Councilor Blair and then Vice President Brica.
I don't think we had adequate information myself, Sarah, to think it's an emergency. Is the unit broken down?
No.
Or is it like the 20-year-old boiler I got at home
Mine
in
is
my
35.
house that, I worry about, but I'm not gonna replace it yet. I mean, I just think we should have had more information on it to make it an emergency. Broke down, caused it need a repair, similar to the one at the senior center. I don't know. Yeah, some of these boilers last 40 years. Hope mine does.
Agree.
So, explain, somebody came out to evaluate it and then they gave a price.
So, thank you, President Coopers. I also don't think that this is I do not feel that this particular piece of business is an emergency measure. If you look at the backup that we do have, it simply states, it's a recommended replacement, boilers are over 20 years old. And just as a point of reference, we came in here tonight, and Councilor Jackson asked to have the air conditioning turned off because we're still running the air here. So I think that the normal process by which we would send down an appropriation, I think that that's necessary. And we keep receiving communications that say we don't have a price yet, but so we don't have to wait. So that's been a pattern, and every time that comes up, one of us says, how come we don't have an actual price or things like that? So it's just a practice that I'm uncomfortable with. So I won't be supporting this as an emergency measure.
Okay, so Council Cooper, so I didn't have this in my backup. I mean, I don't know why. Maybe someone else did. Maybe you do. Do you have?
Yeah, we have
Part of
that.
the
Do you have yours in your backup?
It was in the communication for tonight.
I didn't have it. I don't know why I didn't have it, but. So I see some of the reasons, but again, I guess, I mean, I'm not heating City Hall, but my furnace is 35 years old, almost 38. I might even be 38 years old. And I would know how much it's gonna cost me if I was gonna replace it. You know, I've already looked into it. I know what the cost would be. It is, 20 years old. That's, to me, not old. There are some things that are wrong with it, but I don't know. I just don't think it's an emergency. I think that we should bring it down. I think we need to stop calling everything an emergency, and it should come down like it should come down. Hasn't broken down. We haven't had to repair it a lot of times, and even though I see this here, I don't know. I guess I'm gonna, reach out to the rest of the council and see what the vote is.
Any other questions of Council Holmes?
Thank you. So I know usually we get 3 estimates. Does that happen with a replacement as well, or is that for just construction projects? I don't know if anybody can answer that, but isn't that, when it comes down in emergency, the money is just requested versus getting some estimates?
I'm looking at Rick for a reason, because I think there's a monetary threshold by which you have to get the 3.
Okay.
But again, at this point, we're talking about, do we think this is an emergency based on what we have in front of us? So this is on the emergency preamble, and then we'll get to the motion. So we wanna just be mindful of of what we're asking. The
Yeah.
question before us right now is, do we think this is an emergency based on what we know?
Yeah.
It doesn't say that they're from my perspective, it doesn't say that they're failing and can't, and are not running, but I don't think there's enough information here. Did you have additional questions?
Well, just that, when they do keep coming down as an emergency, it's like we're missing a piece, and that's my concern, is that we're not following through with, it's like we're being forced to just agree with something versus kind of a process, so that's my concern.
Okay, thank you. Council Dolan, did you have comments?
So it says that they're both leaking water. So, I don't know, I mean, that's kinda, that's concerning to me. That would cause further damage. I don't know where they're physically located, and if they're leaking, the water that's leaking, it can damage something else. I don't know. Again, I don't know where the boilers are located.
To Council Dolan's point, all the more reason that I don't think this should be viewed as an emergency. I think there are questions that come down. The other question I have is the date of the work order was September 12th. So it could have come down in the communication on the 17th. So I think it's something that we need to pay attention to, but I don't know that 2 weeks at this point is gonna make a big deal. So I'm struggling supporting this as an emergency.
Council Jackson?
So, Mr. President, can we withdraw the second to the emergency preamble and not even read the rest of the motion at all? Like, not even do it this evening instead of?
So, my plan was, hearing what you said, was to actually vote it and refer it back to committee at the end of the vote.
Gotcha.
Right, so that it doesn't come out of council, it gets assigned to a committee. The emergency preamble fails, but the other motion would still be in front of the committee.
Okay.
Right, so this matter was assigned to the committee. how we bring it out, this motion before us as an emergency needs to be, in my mind, acted upon, whether we think it's an emergency or not. But the matter is still before that committee, hasn't been voted from that committee.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Who was the second on that motion?
Council Jackson.
That's what I thought, okay.
Any other questions or comments? Council Conti.
Yes, Mr. President. Listening to the conversations of my fellow councils, it looks like the emergency is going to fail. One thing has me very concerned, and that is that boiler number 2 is leaking combustion air into space, which is the air that we breathe in City Hall. And that it's clear that the 2 boilers are leaking water, so I will be supporting this as an emergency measure because I believe it is an emergency to the health of the city workers, and that concludes my comments.
Thank you. Council Cobus.
I'm torn on this one. Councilor DeLisi, you made a great point that we received this on the 12th, or the city received it on the 12th. It should have came down as a communication on the 17th, and then this wouldn't be an emergency measure. I'd love to send a message to say, hey, you can't be sending these down as emergency measures. We don't know if it requires 3 estimates or not. We don't know what the actual cost is. I would love to say no to this. My concern with that is that I don't think city workers should potentially be punished because the administration didn't get this to us on time. If we delay this now, we don't vote it out until the 22nd, potentially.
15th, right?
Or, sorry, the 15th, and then however long it takes to have something scheduled, to have somebody come in. We're looking at not having heat until early November, potentially, which may be okay. But I just have some concerns with that. That concludes my comments.
Thank you. Council Blair and then Vice President Brickett.
Mr. Cobus, I think it's gonna take 2 weeks anyway to get somebody lined up to do this, I assume. It'll give you time to get the estimates, and if we need 3 quotes, and I believe that's over the threshold, I'd think Mr. Conti would know that, but I think 35 grand's over the threshold. It's not? 50? Okay, thank you very much. But do a little work in the next 2 weeks, get it squared away. We talk about it, can vote it out of committee next week, we vote on it the following week, the boilers could be on their way.
Vice President Brickett.
Thank you. Well, I think it's interesting because we don't have any documentation about what the estimate of the estimate would be. We don't have any documentation saying that there was a conversation that, yeah, it'll be around 35 grand to replace both of those or anything like that. So it could be a matter that whatever it is that's necessary comes back and it is over that $50,000 threshold. We don't know that information. And I think taking the route suggested by President Cooper of having it being assigned to committee, it'll be discussed on Tuesday, voted out the following week. The same thing, we could have that information. Chances are they would have those exactly how much we're looking for. And again, it's it doesn't say that they're not working. I guess my question being that I'm not a boiler specialist is that there is some, is it specific to heat? Have we even turned the heat on here yet? It only leaks when it's running. Is it running now? Was it just the inspection portion of it? We need to turn them on between now and then? I think taking the two. I agree with Councilor Cobus that we don't want to hold our city employees in an uncomfortable position because things were not done in an expedient manner. But we have a due diligence and a responsibility to people outside this building too, to make sure that we're buying things in the appropriate manner and spending the right amount of money. So again, I will state that I will not be supporting this as an emergency measure.
Mr. Cooper, if they're leaking water, they're hot water boilers. I would be more concerned, as Richard spoke, if they were a hot air system and we were leaking fumes and pumping fumes throughout the building. But if a heat exchanger is leaking a little bit of steam or it's a water leak down in the cellar, I don't think that it would be adversely affecting the air quality in the building.
Councilor Conti, is the boilers, do you recall, if the boilers, are they in the capital improvements plan?
I don't recall,
Just wondering. Okay, thanks.
but I would like to question, Councilor Blair. I thought the heat and the cooling was delivered through the ductwork.
The AC does. You have what you call a hydro air system, where you have a hot water boiler, feeds a unit, and air blows over this unit, either cooling, because you have a cooling unit inside this unit, and a heating unit. But the boiler itself is a hot water boiler, does not push out air.
So if I may, this line, boiler number 2 is leaking combustion air into space. You're not necessarily meaning breathing space.
Down in the boiler room, more than likely.
Boiler room
Not
space.
circulating up here.
So, I'm just gonna say this again, so we get back to what I was saying. I don't think it's an emergency. This came out on the 12th. That's 20 days ago, little less maybe. If it was an emergency, we should have been asked that day almost. You know, it could have come out to us. You would have immediately have said something. I think we can bring it out as a regular motion. That's what it should do. And, you know, if by chance it fails, well, okay, it fails, and that's what happens. It fails, and then you have it fixed that day. There are people that will come out, and you will get a price for it, and we will know what we're paying for it. I don't think that you can keep bringing these things down, saying they're an emergency, and we do that. There's rules that we're supposed to follow too, and we need to follow them. It's just, didn't come down as an emergency 20 days later from the date that the office got it. That's just, it makes no sense, So I will not be supporting it as an emergency myself, I just won't.
My one question is, are we comfortable that if we don't pass this as an emergency measure tonight, that we'll be able to have the repairs completed if we pass it in 2 weeks before the first week in November? Are we comfortable that that time frame is?
I don't
Oh.
think we can speculate on what the time frame is based on the information that was provided, right? We have no insight into that based on what was provided to us. That will have to be the takeaway from Sarah's work in the committee to connect with the administration to figure out what the timeline is, given the fact that if it doesn't pass the emergency measure, she's got some homework to do between now and next week with the committee meeting.
Fine.
Just very quickly, as a response to Councilor Cobus, they're not completely broken. They're still functioning. There's a request to change them, so it's highly unlikely that if the weather turns cold in a short order, that they won't actually be able to function. They may not function at their best capacity and ability, but they will still function. There won't be a time where people are without heat until we're replacing the systems. So.
Any other questions or comments? So this is on the emergency preamble. A 2/3 roll call vote is required, and we'll begin with Councilor Blair.
Mr. Blair,
No.
Ms. Holmes,
Yes.
Ms. Reynolds,
No.
Ms. Dolan,
Yes?
Mr. DeLisio,
No.
Vice President Perica,
No,
Mr. Cobus,
No.
Mr. Conti,
Yes.
Mr. Waterman,
Yes.
Ms. Jackson,
No.
President Cooper,
No.
4 yeas, 7 nays.
Motion fails.
Got some date we need. From the docket of October 10th, 2019, I move to approve the request of the mayor as an emergency measure to transfer 30, no.
You're done.
I'm done.
call committee
So
meeting.
I would like to call that's all the city property and claims has this evening. I would like to call a committee meeting at the next appropriate time.
Thank you.
Thank you. Calling ordinance election legislative matters committee, yes, I guess I have one motion this evening. On the docket of November 6, 2018, I move to approve the addition of 10-4, section 18 of the revised ordinance of the city of Attleboro as it pertains to the ordinance adding traffic calming device.
Second.
Thank you.
Thank you. Motion's in order.
Thank you. I spoke last week about this, and really making it more specific to municipal buildings and 500 feet beyond, basically with the hopes that it can pass so we can get the high school project moving along. The hope is that they are going to be using them around the traffic circle there, so I'd like to make an amendment to this if I can. So this would be to change conditions to A, speed humps may only be located within the property limits of a municipal facility such as school, public works facility, or administrative complex. If a city roadway is both within a municipal facility and outside the said facility, only a portion of the roadway within the municipal facility and 500 feet beyond its boundary. Oh, I'm gonna do them all. So speed humps cushions may only be installed within the portion of the roadway located within a municipal complex and 500 feet beyond the municipal complex and shall be posted with a speed limit of 30 miles or less. And D, signage shall be located within 10 feet of the speed humps and speed cushions. And the placement. A, the placement of the speed humps and cushions shall be determined and recommended by the administrative leader of a municipal facility to the mayor, who will refer to the Traffic Study Commission. Upon study and recommendation from the Traffic Study Commission, the mayor may cause the speed hump to be installed with or without conditions, including denial of the request. And B, the mayor shall notify the municipal council of any speed humps installed at a municipal facility. However, the municipal council confirmation is not required.
Second.
Thank you.
Thank you. So, motion as revised is in order. Any additional comments, Council Holmes?
Thank you. I talked about, we had a long discussion last week about this, and basically the hope is that we do need, it seems like every committee's kind of been dealing with the high school, I think Public Works, even Todd's committee, and so this is just part of that process. And so I'm hoping that this can get support, but I really didn't feel comfortable making permanent speed humps in the whole city, because I feel like we're missing that step of having the engineers come in and let us know what we need. I felt like it was a little bit premature to do that. So I think that this is what's required right now for the city, but not necessarily the whole ordinance. I didn't feel like is what we needed.
Great. Any additional comments? Council Plitt?
Thank you. So thank you, Councilor Holmes. I think we've discussed it last week. You did a fantastic job with this, and I think it moves that project along specifically where we need more work as it pertains to it, to traffic calming devices being installed in across the city. It's the engineering portion and who pays for that and things like that. That's something that needs to be fleshed out. I would also like to make a motion to amend that the first sentence of 10-4.18.
Point of order.
Oh, sorry.
We didn't vote on the first
Oh,
one.
I'm so sorry.
Yes, we did that.
My apologies.
We'll get there.
We'll get there. You have my support, and then on the first part of the amendment, then we'll do another one. Sorry.
Thank you. Any other questions on the amendments proposed? Council Delicio.
This makes sense, and it's become a little bit of a buzzword when we say it's the revised ordinances and we can revise them. There's just too much we don't know about these speed humps right now, and I think that this council has proven that traffic calming is something that we are in support of, but I think right now, for what we need to do, I think you've done a nice job at crafting a concise ordinance which makes sense, so we can move that project forward while we can continue the bigger discussion and get some of the bigger, higher level questions answered that we need.
Thank you.
Council Holmes, one thing I think you left out that you may just want to make one final comment about is the feedback from the city solicitor. You did present this.
Oh, yes, I did present it to the city solicitor. She reviewed it, and she made some changes to even the original one, so even though she had already reviewed that, so it was nice to get her to review it again, and this was completely appropriate, she said.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments on the motion as amended? Seeing none, a roll call vote is required, and we'll begin with, we're gonna vote on the amendments first, and then the motion as amended, I'm sorry.
With Ms. Jackson, I think.
The roll call vote, and we'll begin with Counselor Jackson.
Ms. Jackson,
Yes.
Mr. Waterman,
Yes.
Mr. Conti,
Yes.
Cobus,
Yes.
Vice President Parika,
Yes.
Mr. Delicio.
Yes.
Ms. Dolan.
Yes.
Ms. Reynolds.
Yes.
Ms. Holmes.
Yes.
Mr. Blair.
Yes.
President Cooper.
Yes.
11 yeas, 0 nays.
Thank you, motion passes. And now the motion as amended. Any additional comments, Councilor Holmes? President Parika?
I have one specific amendment and then a general amendment to make. So for the first, I would like to make a motion to amend that the title of section 10-4.18 be amended to reflect permanent traffic calming device.
Second.
And that was seconded by Councilor Holmes?
Yes.
Yep.
So it's kind of self-explanatory with the traffic calming devices are speed humps, speed cushions, speed tables. So it depends on the roadway, the width of the roadway, and again, that reflects back on the engineering portion of it. So instead of having it be specific to speed humps, and it just kind of generalizes and allows for a little more flexibility in the in the ordinance.
Any other questions or comments about the amendment?
Just a quick clarification, did you say traffic calming device or devices? Plural?
I would say devices.
Okay.
Mr. Jackson, you have a question?
No, I don't, thank you.
Great.
Oh, I was gonna say something.
Yes.
In some ways, I think that that's great, because we're actually, like, we're limiting what this ordinance does, but in some ways, we're actually giving them more options as well. Like, having the traffic calming devices means that they can decide what's appropriate for these roadways. So I think I
Any
will
other-
support this.
Any other questions or comments as amended?
Just as do you want me to make my other recommendations for the amendment, to do them all at the same time? Because it's actually specific to just changing the title to traffic calming devices and updating the definition a little bit. I just didn't know if you wanted to do that all in one vote.
No, let's do them separate, just so
Okay.
that it's clean. If somebody has a particular issue with one or the other,
Okay.
they wanna not even support them.
Okay.
Vote the whole thing. Any other questions or comments? Seeing none, the motion as amended requires a roll call vote, and we'll begin with Councilor Blair.
Mr. Blair.
Yes.
Ms. Holmes.
Yes.
Ms. Reynolds.
Yes.
Ms. Dolan.
Yes.
Mr. Delicio.
Yes.
Vice President Parika.
Yes.
Mr. Cobus.
Yes.
Mr. Conti.
Yes.
Mr. Waterman.
Yes.
Ms. Jackson.
Yes.
President Cooper.
Yes,
11 yeas, 0 nays.
thank you, motion passes. Councilor Holmes, any additional questions or comments? Vice President Parika?
Thank you. I would like to make a motion to amend in section -1A. I would just reverse traffic calming measures are speed humps, speed cushions, or speed tables. I would just change traffic calming devices are speed humps, speed cushions, and speed tables in the definition.
Second.
Thank you, motion's in order. Any additional questions or comments? Okay, so the motion as amended, actually, on the amendment, any additional questions? Seeing none, a roll call vote is required, and we'll begin with Councilor Jackson.
Ms. Jackson.
Yes.
Mr. Waterman.
Yes.
Mr. Conti.
Yes.
Mr. Cobus.
Yes.
Vice President Parika.
Yes.
Mr. Delicio.
Yes.
Ms. Dolan.
Yes.
Ms. Reynolds.
Yes.
Ms. Holmes.
Yes.
Mr. Blair.
Yes.
President Cooper.
Yes,
11 yeas, 0 nays.
thank you, motion passes. Councilor Cobus, I'm gonna go up.
Just a question, so I'm supportive of the general nature of these amendments. One thing I would like to see before voting on the full thing is I would like to see the full proposed legislation in writing, though, just to have a chance to go through it one more time. So is it possible for us to make these amendments and then wait 2 weeks to?
If you wanna withdraw all these seconds and go through this again, you can.
No.
But we're voting.
No.
Thank you.
Vice President, can we have a recess, a 10-minute recess?
So she can type this in 10 minutes?
No.
You can call for it, but I don't know if people would support it. We go through this with these types of things all the time. That's why if it was that easy to call for a recess, I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing with 2 different color pens and a highlighter, so that we can make heads or tails of it. And I'm certain Virginia's gonna have to go back and watch the tape again to get the motion right. So we've had 3 amendments. The bigger amendments were passed out 2 weeks ago in red, and those were all what was done as part of amendment number 1. Number 2 was simply a title change. Number 3 was simply adding our speed humps, cushions, or tables. So, I mean,
We just voted on them.
right, we just voted on the, yeah.
There is just one singular additional amendment, and that's just to replace speed humps throughout the rest of the document with traffic calming measures. We're not making changes to the purpose of the ordinance. We're not making changes to, we're just making the language consistent from the beginning of this ordinance to the bottom of this ordinance. So that's all, that's the only amendments that I'm making, and perhaps I wasn't clear about that, but.
So the motion before us now is the amendment number 3, to add our hump, oh, that
The
passed.
2, that passed. I haven't
They all
made the
passed.
third one.
Now, yeah, now we're on to,
So I'd like to make a motion to amend that for the rest of 10-4.18, permanent traffic calming devices, that all language throughout that we take out traffic, speed humps or cushions, and install permanent traffic calming device. There's a variety, there's like maybe 10 other places that that's referenced, and that's just a housekeeping measure.
Second.
so I find it, oh, one more.
And
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 times. Okay, we're changing it to traffic calming measure, right?
traffic calming device,
Who seconded that?
Jay?
Mr. Delizio.
Okay, motion is now in order. Any additional comments? Seeing none, a roll call vote is required. We'll begin with Councilor Blair on the amendment.
Mr. Blair?
Yes.
Ms. Holmes?
Yes.
Ms. Reynolds?
Yes.
Ms. Dolan?
Yes.
Mr. Delizio?
Yes.
Vice President Perica?
Yes.
Mr. Cobus?
Yes.
Mr. Conti?
Yes.
Mr. Waterman?
Yes.
Ms. Jackson?
Yes.
President Cooper?
Yes,
11 yeas, 0 nays.
thank you. Motion passes. Now the motion as amended. Any additional questions or comments, Council Holmes?
Well, I don't want anybody to feel like they're confused, but basically, we're just limiting this to municipal facilities of 500 feet beyond, and then I feel like the language, updating that to traffic calming devices is just making it more concise and allowing for whatever is appropriate for that area. So sometimes it would be a table, sometimes it would be a speed hump, and so this is just giving them the option to do what is appropriate in that place. So that's this ordinance in summary.
Any additional questions or comments? Everybody know what they're voting on? Roll call vote is required, and we'll begin with Council Jackson.
Ms. Jackson?
Yes.
Mr. Waterman?
Yes.
Mr. Conti?
Yes.
Mr. Cobus?
Yes.
Vice President Perica?
Yes.
Mr. Delizio?
Yes.
Ms. Dolan?
Yes.
Ms. Reynolds?
Yes.
Ms. Holmes?
Yes.
Mr. Blair?
Yes.
President Cooper?
Yes,
11 yeas, 0 nays.
motion passes.
Thank you. That concludes the business, and I'll call for a committee meeting at the next appropriate time.
Great, thank you. Council Blair?
Reporting Public Safety and Emergency Management from the docket of October 1st, 2019. I move to approve the expending of $22,500 grant from the Department of Fire Safety for the purchase of a gear extractor drying cabinet at the South Attleboro Fire Station. The grant money must be expended no later than June 30th, 2020, and this council approve expending such funds and any future grant amendments. No matching funds are required.
Second.
Thank you. Motion's in order.
We talked about committee last week, but long overdue for these guys, and I'm glad that, we were able to get that grant and expedite the process for them.
Any additional questions or comments? Seeing none, roll call vote is required, and we'll begin with Council Blair.
Mr. Blair?
Yes.
Ms. Holmes?
Yes.
Ms. Reynolds?
Yes.
Ms. Dolan?
Yes.
Mr. Delicio?
Yes.
Vice President Parika?
Yes.
Mr. Cobus?
Yes.
Mr. Conti?
Yes.
Mr. Waterman?
Yes.
Ms. Jackson?
Yes.
President Cooper?
Yes.
11 yeas, 0 nays.
Motion passes.
Thank you, and before I adjourn, I'd like to take this opportunity to thank Councilor Cobus for eloquently representing his council at the Moving Wall Monument. I was there Thursday in the rain, Todd was, and several others. I volunteered and I parked cars, and I felt honored to help park the cars and help the handicap. I don't think I could have made it at the wall where I was originally asked to do it. I was afraid I wouldn't do it adequately, and emotionally I don't know if I could have handled it. And Todd gave a speech. I brought my wife Monday, and again, Monday at the closing ceremony. Todd brought tears to my eyes. And I can't thank you enough, Todd, for representing this council in the fashion you did over this weekend at that memorial.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I have no other business this evening, and request a committee meeting next week at the appropriate time.
Great, thank you. There is no old business. There are 2 items of new business, and for that, I will recognize Council Cobus.
I move to refer the following matter to the appropriate committee for study and recommendation. New business, to increase the gross receipts that seniors may have in the prior calendar year to be eligible to defer property taxes under Mass General Law, Chapter 59, Section Clause 41A, from $20,000 to 100% of the amount established annually by the Commissioner of Revenue as the income limit for seniors who are not heads to qualify for the circuit breaker state income tax credit for the preceding state tax year, with such increase to be effective for deferrals granted for taxes assessed for any fiscal year beginning after July 1st, 2020.
Second.
Thank you. Motion is in order.
So everyone received this handout, I believe this was last week?
Yes.
And so this is talking about the 41A property tax deferral, and this is changing the max income level from 20,000 to what's defined by the circuit breaker, which right now it's 58,000 for single, 73,000 for head of household, and 88,000 for married. So that's what this first one is.
Any other additional questions or comments? Steve, in the business, do we have to do roll call? Do roll, just a voice vote.
New business.
New business.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I thought. Any other questions or comments? Seeing none, a voice vote is required. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you, motion passes.
I move to
Oh,
refer.
wait a minute. I'm gonna refer that to the senior tax special committee.
And this
Now
is,
we can go.
and this is another joint motion from Councilor Holmes and myself. I move to refer the following matter to the appropriate committee for study and recommendation. New business, that the city of Attleboro reduce the rate of interest that accrues on property taxes deferred by eligible seniors under Mass General Law, Chapter 59, Section 5, Clause 41A, from 8% to 2.5%, with such reduced rate to apply to taxes assessed for any fiscal year beginning after July 1st, 2020.
Second?
Thank you, motion is in order.
And this is just changing the other portion, the other yellow boxes of 41A, changing the interest rate from 8% to 2.5%.
Any other questions or comments? Seeing none, voice vote is required. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you, motion passes, and that will also be referred to the senior tax, Special Committee on Senior Taxes. With that, I would entertain a motion.
President?
Yes.
In your meeting, weekly meetings with the mayor, next week, would you please make it a note to review the reserve fund for transfer amounts? There's serious discrepancies in tonight's mayor's communication. So, just present the council with a solid number at our next full council meeting, please.
I can have him send that in his communication, and I'm sure somebody here is hearing it, but I will
Thank you.
remind him. Thank you. Any additional questions or comments? With that said, I'd entertain a motion to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
We're adjourned 9:25.